The smell of vomit mixed with Emma Rodriguez's turkey sandwich as she knelt on the sticky cafe floor, tears streaming down her face while Tyler Mitchell's cruel laughter echoed above her. What Tyler and his crew filming this humiliation for? Their social media didn't know was that the quiet transfer student they'd been tormenting for months wasn't just another poor kid working minimum wage. Emma Rodriguez was about to teach them that sometimes the mouse you're torturing turns out to be a lion in disguise. And when lions finally roar, the sound can shatter everything you thought you knew about power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez had perfected the art of becoming invisible long before she walked through the doors of Lincoln Valley High School on that crisp September morning. At 16, she possessed a kind of quiet stillness that made people's eyes slide past her rather than linger, which was exactly how she preferred it. Her mother had always told her that sometimes the greatest strength came from being underestimated, and Emma was about to discover just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The hallways of Lincoln Valley buzzed with the familiar energy of a new school year, but Emma moved through them like a ghost. She'd transferred to Millbrook, Ohio from Chicago, and the official story was simple enough. Her mother had taken a new job. They needed a fresh start, and Lincoln Valley was just another public school in just another American suburb. The truth, as it always seemed to be in Emma's life, was far more complicated than anyone around her could imagine. Tyler Mitchell noticed her on the second day. He was everything that Lincoln Valley High School worshipped: tall, blonde, quarterback material with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to question whether you belonged somewhere. His father, Robert Mitchell, owned the most successful law firm in 3 counties and sat on the city council. Tyler drove a different car each week, not because his family was showing off, but because they owned a luxury car dealership as a side investment. In the ecosystem of high school politics, Tyler Mitchell was apex predator, and he had the instincts to match. Emma caught his attention not because she was beautiful, though she was in a quiet, understated way, but because she seemed immune to his presence. While other girls giggled when he passed or tried to catch his eye in the hallways, Emma simply existed in her own space, focused on her books, her thoughts, her carefully constructed bubble of anonymity. For someone like Tyler, who was accustomed to being the center of every room he entered, Emma's indifference was like a personal challenge. The first incident was small, almost forgettable. Emma was at her locker between classes when Tyler and his crew, Connor Walsh and Blake Stevens, appeared beside her. Tyler leaned against the neighboring locker with practiced casualness, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone within a 20-foot radius. "Hey there, new girl," Tyler said, his voice carrying that particular tone of fake friendliness that teenagers use when they're establishing dominance. "Emma, right? Where'd you transfer from?" Emma glanced at him briefly, her dark eyes unreadable. "Chicago," she answered simply, continuing to organize her books. "Chicago, huh?" Connor chimed in, grinning at Blake. "Big city girl slumming it in little old Millbrook. What brought your family to our humble corner of Ohio?" "My mom got a job here," Emma replied, her voice steady but quiet. She closed her locker and started to walk away, clearly hoping the conversation was over. But Tyler wasn't finished. He fell into step beside her, his longer stride easily keeping pace. "What kind of job?" "My dad knows pretty much everyone worth knowing in this town. Maybe he knows your mom." Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She works in healthcare administration." It wasn't technically a lie. Dr. Elena Rodriguez did indeed work in healthcare administration. What Emma didn't mention was that her mother was the chief executive officer of Medicor Solutions, one of the largest healthcare technology companies in the Midwest, with annual revenues exceeding $2 billion. She also didn't mention that the job that brought them to Millbrook was actually the opening of a new regional headquarters, or that her mother had chosen this particular suburb specifically because she wanted Emma to experience something resembling a normal teenage life. Tyler seemed to lose interest once Emma's background appeared appropriately mundane. Healthcare administration sounded boring and middle class, exactly the kind of unremarkable career that would bring someone to a place like Millbrook. He peeled away from her with a dismissive, "Cool, well, welcome to Lincoln Valley," that made it clear she'd been categorized and filed away as unimportant. Emma should have felt relieved, but something in Tyler's eyes during those few moments of conversation made her uneasy. She recognized the look of someone who was used to getting what they wanted and who didn't handle being dismissed gracefully. She made a mental note to avoid him as much as possible, though in a school the size of Lincoln Valley, complete avoidance would prove impossible. The second incident happened 3 weeks later at Corner Cafe, the coffee shop and sandwich place that had become Lincoln Valley's unofficial after-school headquarters. Emma had gotten a job there partly because she genuinely needed something to occupy her time, and partly because working gave her the perfect excuse to avoid the social complexities of high school life. The cafe was owned by Marcus Thompson, a kind man in his 50s who treated his teenage employees with respect and understanding. Marcus had been impressed by Emma's work ethic and quiet competence, and she'd quickly become one of his most reliable workers. Emma was behind the counter during the busy after-school rush when Tyler and his girlfriend Jessica Hart walked in, followed by their usual entourage. Jessica was everything that high school mythology said the popular girl should be: blonde, beautiful, and blessed with the kind of natural confidence that came from never having been told she couldn't have something she wanted. She was also, Emma would soon discover, casually cruel in the way that only people who've never faced real consequences can be. The group ordered their usual elaborate coffee drinks and took over the large corner table that other customers instinctively avoided. Emma served them professionally, hoping to remain as invisible as she was at school, but Tyler seemed to take notice of her Lincoln Valley uniform shirt. "Well, well," he said loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "Looks like our Chicago transfer is working her way through high school. That's very industrious of you, Emma." Jessica looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through Instagram. "Oh, you're the new girl from my P history class, right? Emma Rodriguez? I didn't know you worked here." "I just started a few weeks ago," Emma replied quietly, hoping the conversation would end there. But Jessica's eyes had that predatory gleam that meant she'd found something interesting. "That's so cool that you're working. I mean, I would totally get a job too. But between cheerleading and student council and college prep, I just don't have the time. Plus, Daddy says I should focus on my studies." She said this with the kind of casual privilege that made it clear working was something other people did, people who didn't have better options. Emma simply nodded and turned to help the next customer, but she could feel their eyes on her for the rest of their visit. When they finally left, Jessica made sure to leave exactly 15 cents as a tip on their $40 order, along with a note that said, "Great service. Maybe save up for some cuter clothes." Marcus found Emma in the back room a few minutes later, staring at the note with an expression of barely controlled frustration. "Don't let them get to you," he said gently. "I've known Tyler Mitchell since he was in elementary school. He's got a mean streak, but it comes from insecurity, not strength." Emma looked up at Marcus, this kind man who had no idea who she really was or what her family was capable of. "How do you mean?" "His father's firm is successful, but it's built on taking advantage of people who can't fight back. Predatory lending, slumlord representation, helping big companies squeeze out small businesses." Tyler learned from watching his dad that power means being able to hurt people without consequences. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "But real power, Emma. Real power is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to. That's strength." Emma nodded, filing away Marcus's words along with the growing collection of observations she was making about Lincoln Valley's social ecosystem. She was beginning to understand that Tyler Mitchell wasn't just a typical high school bully. He was someone who had been raised to believe that his comfort came at the expense of other people's dignity, and that this was not only acceptable but natural. The third incident happened in November, and it was the one that made Emma realize Tyler's attention wasn't going to fade with time. She was in the library during lunch, working on an AP chemistry assignment that she could have completed in her sleep when Tyler appeared at her table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This time he was alone, which somehow made his presence more menacing rather than less. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, though he was already pulling out the chair across from her. Emma looked around the library, noting that there were dozens of empty tables he could have chosen. "I'm studying," she said quietly. "I can see that. Chemistry, right? I'm in a P-Chem too, though I sit in the back and you sit up front, so we haven't really interacted." Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. "You know what's interesting about you, Emma Rodriguez?" Emma didn't respond, but Tyler continued as if she had. "You're smart. Like really smart. Mr. Peterson told Coach Williams that you have the highest grade in the class, and Peterson never tells anyone anything good about students. You're also polite, hardworking, and you keep to yourself. Most people would say those are good qualities." "Most people?" Emma finally looked up from her textbook, meeting Tyler's eyes directly for the first time since he'd sat down. Tyler's smile was cold and calculating. "Most people don't understand that there's something off about you. You don't act like someone who transferred here because mommy got a job in healthcare administration. You act like someone who's hiding something." Emma's heart rate increased, but her expression remained neutral. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. You dress down, but your clothes are expensive if you know what to look for. You drive an old Honda, but it's been completely restored with custom work that costs more than most people's cars. You work at a coffee shop, but you tip Marcus's other employees like money doesn't matter to you." Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "So here's what I think, Emma Rodriguez. I think you're playing some kind of game, and I don't like games I'm not winning." Emma closed her textbook and began packing her things. "I think you have an overactive imagination, Tyler." As she stood to leave, Tyler's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to keep her in place. "I'm going to figure out what you're hiding," he said quietly. "And when I do, everyone in this school is going to know about it." Emma looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. For just a moment, Tyler saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable, something that suggested he might be making a serious mistake. But the moment passed, and Emma simply said, "Let go of me, please." Tyler released her wrist, but his smile remained. "See you around, Emma." As Emma walked away, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she'd never used. "Dr. Elena Rodriguez, CEO." She typed out a message, "We need to talk, tonight." Then she deleted it and put her phone away. She wasn't ready to call in the cavalry yet. But Tyler Mitchell had just made this personal in a way he couldn't possibly understand. Emma had spent 4 months trying to be normal, trying to experience high school the way other teenagers did. But normal teenagers didn't have access to the kind of resources that could end Tyler's world with a single phone call. The question was whether Tyler would push her far enough to make that call. As Emma left the library, she didn't notice Sophia Kim watching from behind the computer terminals. Sophia had transferred to Lincoln Valley the year before, and she recognized the signs of someone being targeted by Tyler Mitchell's crew. She'd been through it herself, and she knew it only got worse from here. What Sophia didn't know was that Emma Rodriguez wasn't like the other students Tyler had destroyed. Emma had been raised by a woman who'd built an empire in one of the most ruthless industries in America, And she'd inherited more than just her mother's intelligence. She'd inherited her killer instinct too. The real war was about to begin, and Tyler Mitchell had no idea what he'd just started. December arrived in Millbrook with the kind of bitter cold that made everyone walk faster and speak less. But the chill in Lincoln Valley High School had nothing to do with the weather. Tyler Mitchell had spent the week since his library encounter, with Emma Rodriguez like a predator circling wounded prey, looking for the perfect moment to strike. What he'd interpreted as Emma's vulnerability was actually something far more dangerous: her growing awareness that the careful balance she'd maintained between her two worlds was about to collapse. Emma had developed a routine that kept her sane. School from 8 to 3, where she attended classes, spoke when spoken to, and avoided the main social areas where Tyler held court. Work at Corner Cafe from 4 to 8, where she found solace in the familiar rhythm of taking orders, making coffee, and cleaning tables. Evenings at home in the modest apartment she shared with her mother, where she could finally drop the mask and be herself. It was a delicate ecosystem, and Tyler Mitchell was about to destroy it completely. The first crack in her facade came. During AP Chemistry, Mr. Peterson had assigned lab partners for the semester's final project, and through what Emma was certain was deliberate malice, she'd been paired with Connor Walsh, Tyler's loyal lieutenant. Connor wasn't cruel in the same calculated way Tyler was, but he was weak, which in some ways made him more dangerous. Weak people did terrible things to prove their loyalty to stronger personalities, and Connor had spent 3 years proving his devotion to Tyler Mitchell. "So Rodriguez," Connor said as they set up their equipment for the day's experiment, "Tyler's been wondering about you." Emma continued measuring chemicals with precision, not looking up from her work. "Has he?" "Yeah, he thinks you're not who you say you are. Like, he thinks you're putting on some kind of act." Connor's voice carried that particular teenage smugness that came from being included in someone else's conspiracy. "He's got this theory that you're actually rich or something, and you're pretending to be poor for some weird reason." Emma finally looked at Connor, her expression carefully neutral. "Why would anyone do that?" "That's what I said." "Like, who would pretend to be poor? That's crazy, right?" Connor laughed, missing the dangerous edge in Emma's silence. "But Tyler's usually right about this stuff. He's got good instincts about people." "Does he?" Emma returned to her measurements, but her hands were slightly less steady than they'd been moments before. "Oh yeah, definitely. Like, remember Sarah Chun from last year?" Everyone thought she was just this quiet Asian girl, but Tyler figured out her parents were loaded. Her dad owns like 5 restaurants in Columbus. Tyler exposed that whole thing on social media, and suddenly everyone knew she'd been lying about taking the bus to school when she actually had a BMW parked 3 blocks away. Emma's blood ran cold. She remembered Sarah Chun vaguely. A senior who'd transferred schools mid-year, supposedly to be closer to family. Now she understood what had really happened. Tyler had destroyed Sarah's attempt at a normal high school experience, and Sarah had fled rather than face the aftermath. "What happened to Sarah?" Emma asked quietly. "Oh, she transferred to some private school. Probably couldn't handle everyone knowing the truth about her." Connor seemed oblivious to the cruelty of what he was describing. "Tyler said it was good for her, you know. Like, she learned not to lie to people." Emma nodded slowly, filing this information away with everything else she'd learned about Tyler Mitchell. He wasn't just a bully. He was someone who took pleasure in destroying other people's carefully constructed lives. Someone who saw deception in every interaction and felt justified in exposing it, regardless of the consequences. The second crack came 3 days later at Corner Cafe. Emma was working the evening shift when Jessica Hart came in alone, which was unusual. Jessica was the type of person who seemed to exist only in groups, feeding off the attention and validation of others. Seeing her by herself was like seeing a shark out of water. "Hi, Emma. Jessica said with artificial sweetness as she approached the counter. "Can I get a vanilla latte? Extra hot." Emma prepared the drink efficiently, hoping Jessica would take it and leave. Instead, Jessica lingered at the counter, scrolling through her phone with obvious purpose. "You know," Jessica said conversationally, "I've been thinking about our conversation a few weeks ago. About how you're working here to help your family out. That's really admirable." "Thank you," Emma replied carefully. "It got me curious, though. I mean, I know everyone's situation is different, but I started wondering about your mom's job. Healthcare administration is pretty broad, you know." Jessica's smile was razor sharp. "So I did a little research." Emma's hands stilled on the espresso machine. "Research? Nothing invasive. Just, LinkedIn, company websites, that kind of thing. It's amazing what you can find online these days." Jessica took a sip of her latte, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. "There are only 3 major healthcare companies with administrative offices in Millbrook. 2 of them are insurance companies with pretty basic office staff. But the third one is really interesting." Emma's heart was racing, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm glad you're interested in healthcare." "Oh, I'm interested in a lot of things. Like Medicor Solutions. Have you heard of them? They just opened a beautiful new regional headquarters right here in Millbrook. Glass and steel, very modern. The kind of place that would attract top-level executives from all over the country." The espresso machine hissed in the silence that followed. Emma realized she'd been holding her breath. Jessica continued with the deliberate pace of someone who knew they held all the cards. "The thing is, Medicor is run by this amazing woman, Dr. Elena Rodriguez. She's got this incredible rags-to-riches story. Started as a nurse, worked her way up through hospital administration, eventually founded her own healthcare technology company. She's worth billions now." Emma's hands were trembling slightly as she wiped down the counter. "That's an inspiring story, it really is. And you know what the most interesting part is?" Jessica leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Dr. Elena Rodriguez has a daughter, 16 years old. Same age as a certain transfer student we both know." The cafe suddenly felt very small and very quiet. Emma was aware of every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Emma said finally. Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Do I?" "Because I think Emma Rodriguez, daughter of billionaire Dr. Elena Rodriguez, has been serving me coffee for the past 2 months while pretending to be just another working-class teenager. I think that's a pretty big lie, don't you?" Emma met Jessica's gaze directly. "What do you want?" "Nothing. I'm just impressed by the commitment to the role. I mean, working here, driving that old car, wearing Target clothes. It's like method acting, but for real life." Jessica's smile widened. "The question is, what happens when everyone else finds out? Are you threatening me?" "Threatening? Oh no, I would never threaten anyone. I'm just observing that secrets have a way of coming out, especially in a place like Lincoln Valley High School. Social media makes everything so public these days." Jessica finished her latte and placed the empty cup on the counter. "Thanks for the coffee, Emma. See you at school." As Jessica left, Emma sank against the wall behind the counter, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. She pulled out her phone and stared at her mother's contact information. One call could end this. One conversation could bring the full weight of Medicor Solutions down on Jessica Hart and Tyler Mitchell, and anyone else who thought they could use Emma's secret against her. But that would also end everything she'd been trying to build here. The friendships she'd started to form, the independence she'd fought for, the chance to be judged for who she was rather than what her family owned. One call would turn her back into the CEO's daughter, forever marked by wealth and privilege she'd never asked for. Marcus found her in the back room 20 minutes later, staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. "Emma, what's wrong?" She looked up at this kind man who'd given her a job and treated her with respect, who had no idea that she could buy his cafe and a dozen others without making a dent in her trust fund. "Marcus, what would you do if you had to choose between protecting yourself and staying true to who you want to be?" Marcus sat down across from her, his weathered face creased with concern. "That's a heavy question for someone your age." "But what would you do?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'd try to remember that who we want to be and who we are aren't always the same thing. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most honest thing you can do." Emma nodded, but she wasn't sure she agreed. She'd been raised by a woman who'd built an empire by refusing to back down from fights, who'd taught her that running away from problems only made them bigger. But she'd also been raised to understand that power came with responsibility, and that using a sledgehammer to swat a fly usually destroyed more than just the fly. The final crack came the next Monday morning. Emma arrived at school to find her locker covered in printouts. Photos of Medicor Solutions headquarters, articles about Dr. Elena Rodriguez's rise to prominence, stock information showing the company's billion-dollar valuation. At the center of it all was a photo that made Emma's blood run cold, her mother. At a charity gala 2 years ago, with Emma beside her in an expensive dress, both of them smiling for the cameras. Students were already gathering, phones out, taking pictures and videos. Emma could hear the whispers starting, the excited buzz of gossip spreading through the hallway like wildfire. She reached for the photos with shaking hands, trying to pull them down, but there were too many and too many people watching. Well, Tyler's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "What do we have here?" He appeared at Emma's side with Jessica, Connor, and Blake, all of them wearing expressions of triumph. The crowd parted for them automatically, recognizing the hierarchy at play. "Looks like someone's been keeping secrets," Tyler continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Emma Rodriguez, daughter of Dr. Elena Rodriguez, CEO of Medicor Solutions. Net worth approximately $3.7 billion. The hallway erupted in shocked whispers and excited chatter. Emma could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear her name being whispered over and over, could sense the shift in how everyone was looking at her. She was no longer the quiet transfer student. She was the rich girl who'd been lying to them all. "I have to say, Emma," Tyler continued, "I'm impressed by the performance. Working at Corner Cafe, driving that beat-up Honda, shopping at Target. You really committed to the bit." Emma finally found her voice. "It wasn't a performance." "No, then what was it? Some kind of social experiment? Rich girl wants to see how the other half lives?" Tyler's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "I bet you and your billionaire mommy had some good laughs about how naive we all were." "That's not true," Emma said, but her voice was barely audible over the growing crowd noise. Jessica stepped forward, her phone already recording. "Come on, Emma, don't you think we deserve an explanation? I mean, we've been welcoming you into our school, our community, and the whole time you've been lying to us." "I never lied about anything," Emma said, finding her strength. "I just didn't advertise my family's financial situation." "Oh, please," Connor laughed. "You took a job at a cafe when you could probably buy the whole building. That's not just omitting information. That's straight-up deception." Blake nodded enthusiastically. "My dad's been struggling to pay for my car insurance, and you're out here playing poor girl while sitting on billions. That's messed up." Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, searching for any sign of understanding or support. Instead, she saw curiosity, judgment, and in some cases, genuine anger. These were teenagers who worked part-time jobs to help their families pay bills, who stressed about college tuition, who made real sacrifices for things Emma could afford without thinking. To them, her deception felt like mockery. "I wanted to be normal," Emma said quietly. I wanted people to see me for who I am, not what my family has. Tyler's laughter was cold and bitter. Normal? You think normal people lie about their identities? You think normal people take jobs away from kids who actually need them? That stung because there was truth in it. Emma's job at Corner Cafe could have gone to someone who genuinely needed the income, someone for whom those hours represented the difference between making rent and sleeping in their car. I never meant to hurt anyone, Emma said. But you did hurt people, Jessica said, still recording. You hurt everyone who believed you were their friend. You hurt everyone who thought you understood what it was like to struggle. You made fools of all of us. The crowd was growing larger, and Emma could see teachers starting to notice the commotion. But she also noticed something else. Sophia Kim stood at the edge of the crowd, her face etched with concern rather than judgment. Their eyes met briefly, and Sophia gave her an almost imperceptible nod, as if to say she understood. Principal Morrison's voice boomed over the hallway chaos. What's going on here? Everyone to your first period classes now. The crowd reluctantly began to disperse, but not before dozens of phones had captured Emma's humiliation. She knew that by lunch, every student in Lincoln Valley High School would know her secret. By evening, it would be all over social media. By tomorrow, reporters would probably be calling the school. Tyler leaned close to her as the hallway cleared. This is just the beginning, Emma. You wanted to play games with us? Now you get to see what happens when the games end. As Emma walked to her first period class, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the weight of other people's expectations. She was no longer just Emma Rodriguez, quiet transfer student. She was Emma Rodriguez, billionaire's daughter. And that label would color every interaction she had for the rest of her time at Lincoln Valley. But Tyler Mitchell had made one crucial mistake in his moment of triumph. He'd assumed that revealing Emma's secret would destroy her, would send her running back to private school and the protected world of the wealthy elite. What he didn't understand was that Emma Rodriguez hadn't been hiding her identity out of shame or weakness. She'd been hiding it out of kindness. And kindness, once withdrawn, left room for something much more dangerous to take its place. The aftermath of Emma's exposed identity spread through Lincoln Valley High School like a virus, infecting every conversation, every glance, every interaction, with a toxic mixture of fascination and resentment. By Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after Tyler's hallway ambush, Emma Rodriguez had become the most talked about student in the school's history. But fame, she was learning, could be its own form of torture. Emma's first period of P literature class was a masterclass in social dynamics. As she walked through the door, the low hum of conversation stopped so abruptly, it felt like someone had thrown a switch. 26 pairs of eyes followed her to her usual seat in the third row, and she could practically hear the thoughts racing through her classmates' heads. Mrs. Patterson, normally chatty and engaging, seemed unsure how to navigate the new reality of having a billionaire's daughter in her classroom. "Good morning, Emma," Mrs. Patterson said with forced brightness. "I hope you completed the reading assignment on Gatsby." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Here they were, about to discuss F. Scott Fitzgerald's critique of wealth and privilege, while Emma sat among them like a living embodiment of everything the novel warned against. Several students snickered, and Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am," Emma replied quietly, opening her well-worn copy of the book. She'd bought it used from the school bookstore, another small deception that now seemed calculated and cruel. "Wonderful. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on Nick Carraway's observations about the wealthy elite?" Mrs. Patterson's question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma looked down at the page, seeing Fitzgerald's words with new clarity. "I think Nick realizes that wealth doesn't make people more moral or more worthy of respect. If anything, it can make them careless with other people's lives because they know they'll never face real consequences for their actions. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma had just described herself, at least from her classmates' perspective. She was the careless rich girl who'd played with their emotions and their trust without considering the consequences. Tyler, who sat 2 rows behind her, spoke up with false innocence. "That's interesting, Emma. Do you think wealthy people ever feel guilty about lying to the people around them?" Mrs. Patterson intervened before Emma could respond. "Let's focus on the text, please. Tyler, what did you think of Gatsby's parties?" But the damage was done. Tyler had established the tone for how these interactions would proceed. Every class discussion, every assignment, every casual conversation would be filtered through the lens of Emma's deception. She would be constantly defending herself, constantly reminded of her betrayal of their trust. Lunch was worse. Emma had always eaten alone or with Sophia Kim in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, but now her presence drew stares from every table. She could hear fragments of conversations as she passed groups of students. Can you believe she was working at Corner Cafe this whole time? My mom works 2 jobs just to pay rent, and this girl was playing dress up. I actually felt sorry for her when Tyler was being mean. Now I feel stupid. Do you think she was laughing at us the whole time?" Emma found Sophia at their usual table, grateful to see at least one friendly face. Sophia looked up from her sandwich with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "So," Sophia said quietly, "billionaire heiress. That's quite a secret to keep." Emma sat down heavily, her untouched lunch tray clattering against the table. "I never meant for it to become such a big deal, didn't you? I mean, you had to know this would come out eventually. Small towns don't keep secrets very well, especially not secrets this big." Sophia's voice wasn't accusatory, just genuinely puzzled. What was the endgame here? Emma realized she didn't have a good answer. She'd been so focused on the day-to-day experience of being normal that she'd never seriously considered what would happen when her charade ended. "I guess I thought I could graduate and leave and none of it would matter. But it does matter. To them anyway." Sophia gestured around the cafeteria. "These kids don't interact with wealthy people very often. You're like a mythical creature to them, and mythical creatures aren't supposed to pretend to be regular people." Before Emma could respond, Tyler's voice boomed across the cafeteria. "Hey Emma, my dad wants to know if your mom needs any legal advice. He specializes in fraud cases." Laughter erupted from Tyler's table, and several other tables joined in. Emma felt something cold and hard settle in her stomach. This wasn't going to end. Tyler wasn't going to be satisfied with one moment of public humiliation. He was going to make her life a living hell until she either fought back or disappeared. "Ignore him," Sophia whispered, but Emma was already standing. She walked across the cafeteria with deliberate calm, aware that every eye in the room was following her movement. Tyler's table fell silent as she approached, his smug grin faltering slightly at her unexpected response. "Actually, Tyler," Emma said in a voice that carried across the suddenly quiet cafeteria, "my mother has an entire legal department. They specialize in cases involving harassment, defamation, and civil rights violations. Would you like me to arrange an introduction?" Tyler's face reddened, but he recovered quickly. "Are you threatening me? I'm answering your question. You asked if my mother needed legal advice. I'm explaining that she has access to some of the best attorneys in the country, people who've handled cases against much more powerful defendants than a small-town lawyer and his spoiled son." The cafeteria was completely silent now. Students held their phones up, recording what they sensed could be an epic confrontation. Emma could see Jessica frantically adjusting her camera angle to get the best shot. Tyler stood up slowly, his height advantage restored. "You think your money makes you untouchable? I think my money makes me dangerous to people who mistake kindness for weakness." Emma's voice was steady, but there was something new in it, something that made Tyler take an unconscious step backward. "I've been patient with you, Tyler. I've endured your little games because I wanted to handle this like a normal teenager. But I'm not a normal teenager, am I? And you've made sure everyone knows that. So what are you going to do? Buy the school? Have your mommy shut down my dad's business?" Tyler's bravado was forced now, and everyone could hear it. Emma smiled. And it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I don't need to do anything, Tyler. You're going to destroy yourself. People like you always do." She turned and walked away, leaving Tyler standing in front of his table with his mouth open and his carefully constructed image of dominance shattered. The cafeteria erupted in excited chatter, but Emma didn't hear any of it. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. Some carefully maintained barrier between her two identities had finally cracked. The rest of the week passed in a blur of whispered conversations, pointing fingers, and social media posts. Emma's confrontation with Tyler had gone viral within the school, with dozens of different angles and interpretations being shared and reshared. Some students admired her for standing up to Tyler. Others saw it as confirmation that she was just another entitled rich girl who thought money could solve everything. Emma tried to maintain her routine, but everything felt different now. At Corner Cafe, customers stared at her with open curiosity. Some were friendlier than before, hoping to curry favor with someone wealthy. Others were colder, resentful of what they saw as her deception. Marcus tried to shield her from the worst of it, but even he seemed unsure how to navigate this new reality. "You know," Marcus said one evening as they cleaned up after closing, "you don't have to keep working here. I'll understand if you want to step back until things calm down." Emma looked at him, this kind man who'd given her a chance when she was just another teenager looking for work. "Do you want me to quit?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I want you to be safe and happy. This job was supposed to give you independence and experience, not make you a target. Tyler made me a target the day I arrived at Lincoln Valley. The job has nothing to do with it. Maybe not. But it's given him ammunition. Every shift you work here, every coffee you serve, it reinforces his narrative that you're playing some kind of game with people's lives." Emma nodded slowly. She understood what Marcus was really saying. Her presence at Corner Cafe had become a liability, not just for her, but for the business itself. Customers were coming in hoping to glimpse the billionaire's daughter, turning the cafe into a tourist attraction rather than a community gathering place. Friday afternoon brought the culmination of the week's tension. Emma was working her usual shift when Tyler, Jessica, Connor, and Blake walked in with an energy that immediately set her on edge. They'd been planning something, she could see it in their coordinated movements and shared glances. They ordered their drinks with exaggerated politeness, Jessica making sure to say please and thank you with theatrical emphasis while filming the interaction. Emma served them professionally, but she could feel the anticipation radiating from their group like heat from a fire. "You know what I love about this place?" Tyler said loudly as Emma prepared their order. "The authentic working-class atmosphere. It's so refreshing to see regular people doing honest work for honest wages." Emma's jaw tightened, but she continued working without responding. "Of course," Jessica chimed in. "Some people here aren't exactly what they seem, are they? I mean, imagine pretending to need a minimum wage job when your family could buy this whole building." Other customers were starting to pay attention now, drawn by the obvious tension in the air. Emma could see Marcus in his office, talking on the phone, unaware of what was developing in his cafe. Connor leaned against the counter with a smirk. "I bet Emma's learned a lot about real life working here. You know, what it's like to actually earn money instead of just having it handed to you." Emma finished preparing their drinks and set them on the counter with more force than necessary. "Your order's ready." "Already? Wow, you're so efficient. I guess when you don't really need the money, you can focus on quality instead of just getting by." Blake's comment was designed to sting, and it worked. Emma's hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with suppressed anger. These four teenagers, who'd never faced a real challenge in their privileged lives, were lecturing her about honest work and authenticity. The irony was suffocating. Tyler picked up his drink and took a deliberate sip. Actually, this tastes a little off. Could you remake it? Emma looked at the drink she'd prepared perfectly, following the same recipe she'd used hundreds of times. What's wrong with it? It's just not quite right. Maybe you were distracted? I know it must be hard to concentrate when you're constantly lying to everyone around you. The cafe had gone quiet now, all conversation stopping as customers sensed the confrontation building. Emma could see people pulling out their phones, anticipating drama they could share online later. The drink is fine, Emma said quietly. No, I really think it needs to be remade. Customer service is important, don't you think? Or does that not matter when you're just playing pretend at having a real job? Tyler's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. Emma stared at him for a long moment, seeing not just Tyler Mitchell, but everything he represented. The casual cruelty of people who'd never faced consequences. The weaponization of privilege disguised as moral outrage. The systematic destruction of anyone who didn't fit neatly into their predetermined categories. Fine, Emma said finally. I'll remake your drink. She took the cup back and dumped the contents in the sink. As she began preparing a new drink, Tyler continued his performance for their growing audience. You know what really bothers me about this whole situation? It's not just that Emma lied to us. It's that she took this job away from someone who actually needed it. Someone whose family depends on every dollar they can earn. Emma's hands stilled on the espresso machine. That accusation hit deeper than the others because it contained a grain of truth that she'd been trying not to examine too closely. I mean, think about it, Tyler continued, warming to his theme. How many kids applied for this position? How many of them got turned down so that a billionaire's daughter could play working-class hero? Jessica nodded enthusiastically. It's like volunteering at a soup kitchen and then taking food home instead of giving it to homeless people. It's performative charity that actually hurts the people it's supposed to help. Emma finished remaking Tyler's drink, her movements mechanical and precise. She'd heard enough. These people didn't understand anything about her motivations or her character, but they'd appointed themselves judge and jury anyway. She set the new drink on the counter with carefully controlled force. Here's your drink. Made exactly the way you ordered it. Tyler picked it up and took another sip, making a show of considering the taste. You know what? I think there might be something wrong with your espresso machine. This still doesn't taste right. Emma felt something snap inside her chest, a cold, clean break that released months of accumulated frustration and anger. There's nothing wrong with the machine, Tyler. The problem is your taste. Excuse me? Your taste. In drinks, in friends, in entertainment. You have terrible taste in everything, but especially in how you treat other people. The cafe was completely silent now, except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of traffic outside. Tyler's face had gone from smug to shocked to angry in the span of seconds. You want to talk about authenticity? Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. Let's talk about your authentic self, Tyler. You're a small, insecure boy who hurts other people because it's the only way you can feel powerful. Your father raised you to believe that cruelty is strength, but all you've really learned is how to be a coward with good lawyers. Tyler slammed his drink down on the counter, sending coffee splashing across the surface. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you. You're every rich kid who's ever used their privilege as a weapon. You're every bully who's ever hidden behind their family's influence. You're every person who's ever confused having power with deserving it. Emma was speaking quietly now, but her words carried across the silent cafe like stones thrown into still water. The difference between us, Tyler, is that I chose to be here. I chose to work, to learn, to try to understand what life is like. For people who don't have unlimited resources. What did you choose? You chose to be exactly what everyone expected you to be. A disappointment. Tyler's face was purple with rage now, his careful facade completely abandoned. You think you're better than me because your family has more money? I think I'm better than you because I don't use what my family has to hurt innocent people. But that's about to change. Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she'd never used. As Tyler watched in growing alarm, she placed a call that would change everything. Mom, it's Emma. We have a problem at school, and I need you to fix it. The silence in Corner Cafe stretched like a held breath as Emma waited for her mother to answer. Tyler stood frozen at the counter, his coffee-stained shirt a testament to his loss of composure, while Jessica's phone continued recording what she sensed would be social media gold. The other customers remained transfixed, understanding. They were witnessing something that would be talked about in Millbrook for years to come. Emma? Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice was crisp and professional, but Emma could hear the immediate shift to concern. What's wrong? Emma kept her eyes locked on Tyler's face as she spoke. I need you to activate the legal department. Full response. I want background checks, financial audits, and a complete investigation into the Mitchell family's business practices. Also, I want security at the cafe and the school. Tyler's bravado cracked visibly. He'd been expecting teenage drama, not corporate warfare. You can't be serious. Emma held up one finger, silencing him while she continued her conversation. Also, Mom, I want you to look into purchasing some local businesses. Start with any properties the Mitchell family has loans on. Dr. Rodriguez's voice sharpened with understanding. Emma, what exactly has happened? Systematic harassment, public humiliation, and what I believe constitutes a hate crime. The individuals responsible seem to think my attempts at normal teenage behavior were some kind of elaborate joke. I'm done pretending to be powerless. The cafe door chimed as Marcus emerged from his office, having finally noticed the commotion. His face went pale as he took in the scene. Emma on the phone with obvious authority, Tyler looking increasingly desperate, and a room full of customers recording everything on their phones. I'll have a team in Millbrook within 2 hours, Doctor. Rodriguez said, Are you safe right now? I'm about to be. Emma ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Tyler, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Tyler tried to regain his composure, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. You think you can scare me with your mommy's lawyers? My father. Your father, Emma interrupted, owes $17 million to Midwest Banking Consortium, which is a subsidiary of Rodriguez Financial Holdings, which my mother owns. Your family's law firm has been investigated twice by the state bar for predatory practices. Your house has 3 mortgages, your cars are leased, and your college fund was emptied last year to cover your father's gambling debts. Tyler's face went ashen. How do you? I know because when you have real money, Tyler, you have access to real information. You've been playing checkers while I've been watching you from a chess master's perspective. Emma stepped closer to the counter, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You wanted to know what authentic power looks like. You're about to get a masterclass. Jessica, still filming, tried to interject. This is crazy. You can't just destroy someone's life because they hurt your feelings. Emma turned her attention to Jessica with the kind of cold focus that made everyone in the cafe step back involuntarily. Hurt my feelings? Is that what you think this was? Let me explain what actually happened here. She walked around the counter with deliberate slowness, no longer the humble barista, but every inch the billionaire heiress she'd been born to be. For 4 months, I worked alongside kids who struggled to pay for gas money. I listened to them worry about college tuition, about helping their families make rent, about whether they could afford new shoes. I learned to respect the dignity of honest work and the courage it takes to build something from nothing. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. filling the cafe with an authority that seemed to change the very air pressure in the room. Then you decided to turn my genuine attempt at understanding into your personal entertainment. You made me into a villain in a story where the real villains were standing right in front of me. Connor and Blake had unconsciously moved closer. Together, their earlier bravado replaced by something approaching fear. They were beginning to understand that they'd badly miscalculated the situation. "Emma," Marcus said quietly, "maybe we should—" "No, Marcus. They wanted authenticity. They're going to get it." Emma's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Tyler, in approximately 90 minutes, a team of forensic accountants will begin examining every financial transaction your family has made in the past 5 years. They're going to find the kickbacks from the car dealership, the money laundering, through the law firm, and the tax evasion schemes your father thought were clever." Tyler's hands were visibly shaking now. "You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to make it expensive and public enough that your father's clients start asking uncomfortable questions. Rich people hate bad publicity. Tyler, it's bad for business." Jessica lowered her phone for the first time since the confrontation began. "This is insane. You're talking about ruining people's lives over high school drama." Emma's laugh was cold and musical. "High school drama? Jessica, let me tell you about high school drama. High school drama is crying over who asked whom to prom. High school drama is arguing about seating arrangements at lunch. What you've been doing is systematic psychological torture, designed to drive me out of school." She pulled out her phone again and began scrolling through screenshots. "Should I read some of the messages you've been posting online? The ones where you call me a lying wetback who probably climbed the border fence? Or perhaps the ones where you speculate about what sexual favors my mother must have performed to build her company?" The cafe fell deadly silent. Even Tyler looked shocked at the revelation of Jessica's private posts. Marcus stepped forward with a face like thunder, but Emma held up a hand to stop him. "Don't worry, Marcus. Jessica's about to learn that screenshots are forever, and defamation lawsuits are expensive." Emma's voice was conversational now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Did you know that my mother sits on the board of 3 universities in Ohio? Including the one where Jessica's been planning to study communications?" Jessica's face went white. "You wouldn't. I wouldn't have to. Academic institutions take hate speech very seriously these days. They'll withdraw acceptance letters for much less than what you've posted." Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. "Of course there's always community college." Connor found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "This is all getting out of hand. We were just messing around." "Messing around?" Emma's attention shifted to him like a laser focusing sunlight. "Connor, you've been spreading rumors that I'm involved in human trafficking because, and I quote, 'How else does a Mexican family get that rich?' Should I have my mother's security team explain to your parents how hate crimes are prosecuted in Ohio?" Blake tried to edge toward the door, but Emma's voice stopped him cold. "Blake, don't leave yet. We haven't discussed your little side. Business selling fake IDs to underclassmen. I'm sure the police would be interested in those Photoshop files on your laptop." The 4 teenagers stood frozen in the center of the cafe, finally understanding that they weren't dealing with a peer anymore. Emma Rodriguez had shed her carefully constructed persona like a snake shedding skin, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. "Here's what's going to happen," Emma continued with the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Tyler, you're going to walk over to that camera Jessica's been holding, and you're going to apologize. Not a fake apology, not a strategic apology, but a real one where you acknowledge the racist, classist, and cruel things you've done." Tyler's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are. Because the alternative is that my mother's legal team files criminal charges for harassment, hate crimes, and conspiracy. Ohio takes this very seriously, especially when the victims have the resources to pursue justice properly. Emma walked back behind the counter and began cleaning Tyler's spilled coffee with methodical precision. You see, Tyler, you made one fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because I was choosing to work here, choosing to live modestly, choosing to treat people with respect, that meant I was weak. You confused kindness with powerlessness. She threw the coffee-stained towel in the trash and looked up at Tyler with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. I am not powerless. I am not weak. I am not your victim. I am Elena Rodriguez's daughter, and I was raised by a woman who built an empire by destroying men exactly like your father. The cafe door chimed as 3 people in expensive suits entered. They moved with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. The lead figure, a woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair, approached Emma with professional deference. Ms. Rodriguez? I'm Sarah Chun, head of Medicore Security. Your mother sent us to assess the situation. Emma nodded without taking her eyes off Tyler. Ms. Chen, these 4 individuals have been conducting a harassment campaign against me for several months. I believe we have grounds for both criminal and civil action. Sarah Chun's gaze swept over Tyler, Jessica, Connor, and Blake with the kind of assessment that made them feel like specimens under a microscope. Understood. We'll need statements from witnesses and copies of any digital evidence. Jessica's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering on the cafe floor. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They weren't dealing with a fellow teenager anymore. They were facing a corporate machine that could crush them without breaking stride. Wait, Tyler said desperately. This is all just a misunderstanding. We were just joking around. Nobody got seriously hurt. Emma's smile was glacial. Nobody got seriously hurt? Tyler, do you remember what happened to Sarah Chun last year? The girl whose family you exposed and humiliated until she was forced to transfer schools? Sarah Chun looked up sharply at the mention of the name, and Emma noticed the reaction. Ms. Chun, any relation to Sarah Chun, formerly a student at Lincoln Valley High? My daughter, Sarah Chun replied, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, who suffered a nervous breakdown and spent 3 months in therapy because of these children's cruelty. The coincidence was almost too perfect. Emma felt something that might have been fate clicking into place. Ms. Chun, I believe we have a very strong case for a pattern of harassment and discrimination. Tyler's legs gave out, and he slumped against the counter. The full weight of what he'd unleashed was finally hitting him. He wasn't just facing Emma Rodriguez, confused teenager. He was facing the Rodriguez family empire, Medicore Solutions, and now a security professional with a personal vendetta. Please, Tyler whispered. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Emma studied him for a long moment, seeing not the confident predator who'd tormented her for months, but a frightened child who'd finally realized he'd been playing with forces beyond his understanding. Tyler, she said quietly, do you know what the difference is between people like you and people like me? Tyler shook his head mutely. People like you use power to hurt others because it makes you feel strong. People like me use power to protect others because that's what strength actually means. Emma's voice was gentle now, which somehow made her words more devastating. You could have been my friend. You could have learned from me, grown with me, become someone worthy of the privilege you were born with. Instead, you chose to be exactly what the world expects from spoiled rich kids. She turned to Marcus, who'd been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of awe and concern. Marcus, I'm sorry this happened in your cafe. I'll make sure you're compensated for any lost business or damage to your reputation. Marcus shook his head slowly. Emma, I owe you an apology. I should have done more to protect you from this. You gave me a job when I needed purpose, and you treated me with dignity when others saw only what they wanted to see. You have nothing to apologize for. Emma gathered her belongings and headed for the door, but Tyler's voice stopped her. Emma, wait. What happens now? She turned back to face him one last time. Now, Tyler, you learn what consequences feel like. Maybe they'll teach you something your parents never did. As Emma walked out of Corner Cafe, she pulled out her phone and called her mother back. Mom, it's done. But I want to do something positive with this. That security team leader, Sarah Chun, her daughter went through the same thing I did. I want to start a foundation. Anti-bullying, harassment prevention, support for kids who are targeted because they're different. Dr. Rodriguez's voice warmed with pride. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing a Rodriguez should do. What did you have in mind? Full funding for counseling, legal support for families who can't afford to fight back, and educational programs in schools. I want to make sure no other kid has to choose between being themselves and being safe. Emma paused at her car and looked back at the cafe, where Tyler and his friends were presumably giving statements to Sarah Chun's team. And Mom, I want to buy Corner Cafe. Marcus deserves to own the place he's put his heart into, and I want to turn it into something that represents what this community could be instead of what it is. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez stood on the stage at Lincoln Valley High School as valedictorian, looking out at a graduating class that had learned to see her not as the billionaire's daughter who'd fooled them, but as the person who'd used her privilege to make their school and their community better. Tyler Mitchell sat in the back row, having returned to school after completing a community service program at a homeless shelter. His father's law firm had been dissolved, but Tyler himself had emerged from the experience as someone Emma barely recognized. The arrogant predator had been replaced by a young man who understood, perhaps for the first time, the weight of real responsibility. In the audience, Marcus Thompson sat next to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, both of them beaming with pride. Corner Cafe had become the Marcus Thompson Community Center, a place where teenagers could work, learn, and find support regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. Emma's speech was simple and direct. We all have power, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the auditorium. Some of us have money, others have talent, influence, or simply the courage to speak truth when others remain silent. But power means nothing if we don't use it to lift each other up. She looked directly at Tyler as she continued. I learned this year that hiding who you are isn't humility, it's cowardice. But I also learned that revealing who you are isn't enough. You have to prove who you choose to be. As Emma walked off the stage to thunderous applause, she felt something she'd been searching for since arriving in Millbrook. She finally knew exactly who Emma Rodriguez was supposed to be. 3 years had passed since Emma Rodriguez graduated from Lincoln Valley High School, but the ripple effects of that confrontation at Corner Cafe continued to transform Millbrook in ways no one could have predicted. The Marcus Thompson Community Center had become the heart of a revitalized downtown district, where the building that once housed a simple coffee shop now served as headquarters for the Rodriguez Foundation's Youth Empowerment Initiative. What had started as one teenager's response to bullying had evolved into a nationwide movement that was changing how communities addressed harassment and discrimination. Emma stood in the gleaming conference room on the 3rd floor of the community center, looking down at the bustling street below where teenagers from Lincoln Valley High gathered after school. Some came for tutoring, others for job training, and many simply because they needed a safe space where they could be themselves, without judgment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been thorough and lasting. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying a stack of reports, her expression mixing pride with the focused intensity that had built her empire. The Michigan expansion is ahead of schedule, she announced, setting the documents on the polished table. Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Kalamazoo all want Rodriguez Foundation centers by the end of the year. Emma turned from the window with a smile that had grown more confident over the years. What about the legal challenges in Texas? Handled. Apparently, when you have documented evidence of reduced bullying incidents, improved graduation rates, and decreased youth crime statistics, even the most conservative school boards start paying attention. Elena took a seat across from her daughter, noting how much Emma had grown into her role as foundation director. The Austin pilot program alone has prevented 43 students from dropping out this semester. The door opened to admit Sarah Chun, who had transitioned from Medicorps security to become the foundation's director of operations. Her daughter had graduated from college with honors and was now working as a counselor at the original Millbrook Center, turning her painful experience into a tool for helping others. "Emma, we have a situation in Seattle that requires your attention," Sarah said, consulting her tablet. "A group of students at Roosevelt High are being systematically harassed by what appears to be an organized campaign. The school administration is resistant to intervention." Emma's expression hardened slightly. Over the years, she'd learned to recognize the patterns of institutional failure that allowed bullying to flourish unchecked. Resistant how? The usual. Claims that kids need to toughen up, suggestions that the victims are exaggerating, hints that outside interference isn't welcome. Sarah's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen these excuses too many times. The harassment has a strong racial component, and 2 of the targeted students have already attempted suicide. "Schedule a meeting with the school board president," Emma said without hesitation. "Also, have our legal team research any federal funding the district receives. Sometimes administrators need to be reminded that discrimination has financial consequences." Elena watched this exchange with satisfaction. Emma had inherited her father's compassion, but learned to wield it with her mother's strategic precision. The shy girl who'd once hidden her identity was now someone who used every tool at her disposal to protect vulnerable children. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Tyler Mitchell has requested a meeting with you." Emma raised an eyebrow. She hadn't spoken to Tyler since graduation, though she'd followed his progress through the community service reports required by his probation agreement. "What does he want?" "He didn't specify, but his community service supervisor says he's been asking about foundation programs. Apparently, he's interested in getting involved somehow." Emma considered this development. Tyler's journey since. Their confrontation had been well documented in local media. After his father's law firm collapsed under investigation, the Mitchell family had lost their home, their cars, and their social standing. Tyler had spent his senior year as a scholarship student, working nights at a warehouse to help his mother pay rent after his father fled the state to avoid prosecution. "Schedule it," Emma decided. "I'm curious to hear what he has to say." The meeting was arranged for the following Thursday in Emma's office at the community center. Tyler arrived precisely on time, looking nothing like the arrogant teenager who had once terrorized fellow students. 3 years of genuine hardship had stripped away his artificial confidence, leaving someone who moved through the world with careful humility. "Thank you for seeing me," Tyler said as he took the seat across from Emma's desk. His clothes were clean but clearly secondhand, and his once perfect hair now showed the effects of someone who cut it himself to save money. Emma studied him with the analytical skills she'd inherited from her mother. "Sarah said you wanted to discuss foundation programs." Tyler nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been working with at-risk youth through my community service, and I keep seeing the same patterns. Kids who hurt other kids because they're hurting inside, because they've learned that causing pain is easier than admitting vulnerability." "That sounds like personal insight." "It is." Tyler met her eyes directly, something he wouldn't have been capable of 3 years earlier. "Emma, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because I faced consequences, but because I genuinely understand now how much damage I caused." Emma waited for him to continue, recognizing the weight of confession in his voice. "I spent 2 years in therapy trying to understand why I became the person I was in high school. The therapist helped me realize that I was replicating patterns. I'd learned from my father that I'd been taught to see other people's pain as proof of my own strength. Tyler's voice was steady but quiet. When I saw you working at Corner Cafe, it threatened everything I thought I knew about social hierarchy. You were supposed to be beneath me, but you were clearly more capable, more intelligent, more genuinely powerful than I could ever be. Emma leaned back in her chair. So you tried to destroy me. I tried to make you small enough that I could understand you. I couldn't process the idea that someone with your resources would choose to work beside people like me unless there was some hidden agenda. Tyler paused, gathering his thoughts. I convinced myself that you were playing a game. That your humility was somehow an insult to people who actually struggled. When really, your cruelty was the insult. Tyler nodded miserably. I know that now. I know that you were trying to understand something I never bothered to learn, which is what it means to earn respect instead of demanding it. Emma rose from her chair and walked to the window overlooking the community center's main floor. Below, she could see teenagers working together on homework, participating in job training programs, and simply existing in a space where their differences were celebrated rather than weaponized. Tyler, what do you want from me? I want to work for the foundation. Not in some high-profile role, not as some kind of redemption story for your publicity materials. I want to do whatever needs doing to help kids avoid becoming what I was. Emma turned to face him. Why? Because I know exactly how a bully thinks. I understand the insecurities and fears that drive that behavior. I can recognize the warning signs in other kids because I lived them myself. Tyler's voice grew stronger as he explained his reasoning. Most anti-bullying programs are designed by people who were victims or observers. They don't understand the psychological mechanisms that create bullies in the first place. Emma walked back to her desk and sat down, studying Tyler with new interest. What would you propose? Early intervention programs for kids who show aggressive or discriminatory behavior. Not punishment-based, but therapeutic approaches that address the root causes of cruelty. Workshops for parents who are inadvertently raising children to be prejudiced or entitled. Tyler leaned forward slightly. Emma, there are thousands of kids out there who are heading down the same path I took. If we can reach them before they hurt someone, before they destroy relationships and opportunities, we can save everyone involved. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing not just Tyler's words, but the fundamental change in his character. The person sitting across from her bore little resemblance to the teenager who had once thrown coffee and demanded apologies. You understand that working here would mean confronting your past publicly? The foundation doesn't hide from difficult truths. I understand. I also understand that my past is exactly what qualifies me for this work. Emma made her decision with the same instinctive clarity that had served her well for years. We'll start with a trial period. 6 months, working with our counseling team to develop intervention strategies. You'll be supervised, evaluated, and held to the highest standards of professional conduct. Tyler's relief was visible, but he maintained his composure. Thank you. I won't disappoint you, Tyler. Emma's voice carried a warning that reminded him exactly who he was dealing with. You won't disappoint the kids we serve. This isn't about me anymore. Over the following months, Tyler proved himself to be surprisingly effective at identifying and redirecting potential bullies. His insights into the psychology of aggression helped the foundation develop new approaches that addressed harassment before it became entrenched behavior. Students who might have become perpetrators instead learned to channel their insecurities into positive outlets. The program's success attracted national attention, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities across the country. Emma found herself testifying before Congress about the effectiveness of restorative justice approaches to school violence, while Tyler's transformation became a case study in rehabilitation and personal growth. One afternoon in late spring, Emma received a call that brought everything full circle. Jessica Hart, now a senior at Ohio State University, had reached out through the Foundation's website requesting a meeting. She was majoring in social work and wanted to discuss incorporating the Foundation's methods into her senior capstone project. The meeting took place in the same conference room where Emma had first confronted the scale of Tyler's harassment. Campaign. Jessica arrived looking markedly different from the image-obsessed teenager Emma remembered. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, her demeanor serious rather than superficial. "I know this is probably the last conversation you expected to have," Jessica began, settling into her chair with obvious nervousness. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me." Emma regarded her former tormentor with curiosity rather than hostility. "I'm interested in what you have to say. I want to apologize for the person I was in high school. Not just to you, but to everyone. I hurt with my casual cruelty and my desperate need for social media validation." Jessica's voice was steady but emotional. "I spent my first 2 years of college trying to replicate the same toxic dynamics until a professor challenged me to examine the harm I was causing. What changed? I took a sociology class on digital harassment, and the professor used anonymous examples of cyberbullying to illustrate different psychological patterns. One of the examples was my own posts about you, though I didn't know it at the time." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she continued. "Seeing my own words analyzed as evidence of prejudice and cruelty was devastating. I realized I'd become everything I claimed to hate about mean girls in movies." Emma listened without judgment, recognizing the genuine remorse in Jessica's voice. "I've been working with a counselor to understand why I needed to hurt other people to feel good about myself. I learned that my online persona was a performance designed to hide my own insecurities about not being smart enough, talented enough, or interesting enough to matter on my own merits. That's significant self-awareness." Jessica nodded. "It's taken years to develop. I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want to use what I've learned to help other kids avoid making the same mistakes. I'm hoping to write my capstone project on the effectiveness of intervention programs that address both perpetrators and victims." Emma considered the request carefully. Jessica's transformation seemed genuine, but Emma had learned to be cautious about people seeking redemption through association with the Foundation's success. "What specific aspects of our work interest you?" "The restorative justice components, particularly the programs where former bullies work with current victims. I think there's something powerful about hearing accountability directly from someone who understands the perpetrator's mindset." Emma made a note on her tablet. "I can arrange for you to observe some of our group sessions with participant consent. I can also provide you with anonymized data on program outcomes." "Thank you. That would be incredibly helpful." Emma paused, then asked the question that had been forming throughout their conversation. "Jessica, why is this important to you beyond academic requirements?" Jessica was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with whether to share something. "Personal. My younger sister's a freshman at Lincoln Valley now. Last month, she came home crying because some older students were posting cruel memes about her weight. When she showed me the posts, they were almost identical to things I used to create about other kids." Emma felt a familiar surge of protective anger. "Is she getting support?" "She is now. I contacted the counselors at the community center, and they've been amazing. But watching her go through that pain, knowing I'd caused the same suffering for other families." Jessica's voice broke slightly. "I can't undo my past, but maybe I can help prevent other kids from becoming what I was." Emma studied Jessica for several more minutes, weighing her sincerity against the Foundation's mission to protect vulnerable youth. Finally, she made her decision. "I'll approve your research project with conditions. You'll work directly with Tyler on developing intervention strategies since he has experience from the perpetrator perspective. You'll also participate in our Young Adult Mentor program, sharing your story with high school students who are struggling with similar issues. Jessica's relief was immediate and profound. I accept all of those conditions. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. As Jessica left the community center, Emma reflected on how much her understanding of justice had evolved since that angry phone call to her mother 3 years earlier. True power, she'd learned, wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about creating systems that transformed enemies into allies, that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. The Foundation's annual gala that fall featured both Tyler and Jessica as speakers, sharing their experiences as former perpetrators who had learned to channel their understanding into positive change. Their presentations were raw, honest, and powerfully effective at demonstrating that people could fundamentally change when given proper support and accountability. Emma watched from the wings as Tyler concluded his remarks with words that perfectly captured the Foundation's evolving mission. We used to think that justice meant punishment, that accountability meant suffering. What we've learned is that true justice creates healing for everyone involved. When we help people become better versions of themselves, everyone benefits. The audience rose in sustained applause, but Emma was already thinking about the next expansion, the next group of vulnerable students who needed protection, the next community that could be transformed through focused intervention and genuine care. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Proud of you. Dad would be proud too." Emma smiled, remembering the frightened girl who had once cleaned coffee shops and hidden her identity. That girl had been searching for authenticity in all the wrong places, trying to find herself by becoming smaller. The woman she'd become understood that authenticity meant using every advantage, every resource, every opportunity to create positive change in the world. As the gala continued around her, Emma began planning the Foundation's next initiative, a national network of community centers, where young people could learn that their differences were strengths, where former enemies could become allies, and where the cycle of harm could be broken through understanding, accountability, and hope. 5 years after the Rodriguez Foundation's first community center opened in Millbrook, Emma Rodriguez stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York City, preparing to deliver a speech that would fundamentally change how the international community addressed youth violence and discrimination. The journey from a frightened teenager hiding her identity in an Ohio coffee shop to a global advocate for transformative justice had been remarkable, but the moment that defined everything was about to unfold in the most unexpected way. The assembly hall buzzed with the quiet energy of diplomats, activists, and world leaders who had gathered to hear about the Foundation's revolutionary approach to conflict resolution. Emma's program had achieved something unprecedented, measurable, lasting reductions in youth violence across 3 continents through methods that prioritized healing over punishment. But as she approached the podium, her attention was drawn to a familiar face in the audience that made her heart skip several beats. Connor Walsh sat in the gallery section reserved for Foundation supporters, but he looked nothing like the follower who had once enabled Tyler Mitchell's cruelty. The young man who had laughed while filming Emma's humiliation now wore the uniform of a United States Marine, his posture reflecting discipline and purpose that seemed impossible to reconcile with her memories. The transformation was so complete that Emma wondered if she was mistaken, until their eyes met and Connor offered a respectful nod of acknowledgement. Emma began her address with the steady confidence of someone who had learned to transform personal pain into universal wisdom. Distinguished delegates, we gather today to discuss a crisis that transcends borders, cultures, and economic systems. Youth violence and systematic harassment have become global epidemics, destroying lives and communities with increasing frequency and sophistication. She clicked to her first slide, showing statistics that painted a sobering picture of teenage suicide rates, school shootings, and online harassment campaigns across dozens of countries. Traditional approaches to this crisis have focused on punishment after harm has been done. We separate perpetrators from victims, we impose consequences, and we hope that fear of punishment will prevent future incidents. Emma's voice grew stronger as she moved into the core of her presentation. But what if we've been approaching this entirely wrong? What if the solution isn't to punish people for becoming dangerous, but to prevent them from becoming dangerous in the first place? The audience leaned forward as Emma shared case studies from Rodriguez Foundation centers around the world. A former gang leader in São Paulo who now ran conflict mediation programs for at-risk youth. A group of cyberbullies in Seoul who had developed digital literacy curricula that taught empathy alongside technology skills. A neo-Nazi teenager in Berlin who had become a leading voice against hate speech after participating in a restorative justice circle with his former victims. Each of these transformations began with a simple recognition: hurt people, but healed people heal people. Emma's presentation included video testimonials from participants whose lives had been changed not through punishment, but through accountability, therapy, and the opportunity to make amends through service. When she concluded her formal remarks, the assembly erupted in sustained applause, but Emma found herself scanning the audience for Connor's reaction. His expression was thoughtful rather than celebratory, suggesting that her words had triggered some internal calculation she couldn't decipher. During the reception following her presentation, Emma was surrounded by delegates eager to bring foundation programs to their countries. She was discussing implementation strategies with the Swedish ambassador to the UN when Connor approached their conversation circle with the careful deference of someone who understood military protocol. "Ms. Rodriguez, I apologize for interrupting, but I was hoping I could speak with you privately when you have a moment." The Swedish ambassador glanced between Emma and Connor with diplomatic curiosity, clearly sensing undercurrents in their interaction. Emma excused herself politely and followed Connor to a quieter corner of the reception hall, near floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Manhattan's skyline. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," Connor began, his voice carrying the crisp articulation of military training. Emma studied his face, noting how the years had sharpened his features and eliminated any trace of the weak-willed teenager who had once sought approval through cruelty. "I remember everything about Lincoln Valley High School, Connor. The question is why you're here." Connor's hands clasped behind his back in a posture of formal attention. "I enlisted in the Marines too. Months after graduation. Spent 4 years deployed in various locations, mostly working with local communities on infrastructure and security projects." "That's admirable, but it doesn't explain your presence at a UN presentation about restorative justice." Connor took a careful breath before continuing. 6 months ago, I was stationed in Afghanistan, working with a team that was trying to mediate conflicts between tribal groups that had been feuding for generations. Traditional military approaches weren't working. Threats, sanctions, and shows of force just escalated the violence. Emma waited for him to reach his point, sensing that Connor was building towards something significant. "My commanding officer mentioned a program developed by something called the Rodriguez Foundation, which had been successful in similar situations involving historical grievances and cultural conflicts. When I researched the foundation, I discovered that the Emma Rodriguez leading this work was the same person I had." Connor paused, clearly struggling with the appropriate terminology. "The same person I had participated in harassing during high school." Emma felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the residual emotional response to remembering those months of systematic humiliation. And I realized that while I'd spent 4 years learning how to fight enemies, you'd spent those same years learning how to transform enemies into allies. The impact data from your programs is extraordinary, Emma. You've achieved something that military strategists have been attempting for centuries. Connor's voice took on an urgency that suggested this conversation was deeply important to him. "I'm rotating back to civilian life next month, and I want to dedicate my skills to something that actually creates lasting peace rather than just temporary stability. Emma processed this information with the analytical mind that had guided the Foundation's expansion across multiple continents. Connor's military experience could indeed be valuable in conflict zones where traditional humanitarian approaches had failed. But trusting him would require confronting painful memories and taking a significant risk. Connor, I need you to understand something. The work we do isn't about redemption for former perpetrators. It's about protecting vulnerable people and breaking cycles of harm. If you're looking for absolution or a way to feel better about your past actions, this isn't the right organization for you. Connor nodded with the serious attention of someone accustomed to receiving mission-critical information. I understand. I'm not looking for forgiveness, and I'm not trying to rewrite history. I'm offering specific skills that could help expand your international programs. Emma walked closer to the windows, looking out at the city lights while considering Connor's proposal. The Foundation had been struggling to establish programs in conflict zones where traditional NGO approaches were viewed with suspicion by local populations. Connor's military background and understanding of hierarchical cultures could provide access that civilian advocates couldn't achieve. What exactly are you proposing? Connor joined her at the window, maintaining respectful distance while outlining his ideas. Military to civilian transition programs that use restorative justice principles. Veterans struggling with reintegration often exhibit the same psychological patterns as reformed bullies: shame, isolation, and difficulty processing their past actions in productive ways. Emma found herself genuinely intrigued by the concept. Military veterans did indeed share many characteristics with the Foundation's traditional participants, and their struggles with civilian life often manifested in domestic violence, substance abuse, and other harmful behaviors. Additionally, Connor continued, I have contacts in communities where traditional humanitarian organizations struggle to gain trust. Military personnel are often the first outsiders that isolated populations interact with. If we could train deployed units in basic restorative justice principles, you could address conflicts before they become entrenched patterns of violence. Emma finished, seeing the potential immediately. Connor's expression brightened with the enthusiasm of someone whose strategic thinking was being understood and appreciated. Exactly, prevention rather than intervention. Emma turned to face him directly, studying his face for any sign of the manipulative teenager who had once filmed her humiliation for social media entertainment. Instead, she saw genuine commitment and hard-earned wisdom that suggested Connor had undergone his own transformation during those years of military service. This would be a pilot program, she said finally. 6 months working directly with our trauma specialists to develop appropriate protocols. You would be supervised, evaluated, and held to the same standards as our other program developers. Connor's relief was visible but controlled. I accept those terms completely. And Connor? Emma's voice carried the authority she'd developed through years of leading difficult conversations. This organization is built on radical honesty about past harm and present accountability. If you're going to work with trauma survivors, you need to be completely transparent about your own history. Connor straightened to full attention. I understand, and I'm prepared for that responsibility. The following months proved Connor's commitment to genuine transformation. His work developing veteran transition programs exceeded every expectation, and his ability to communicate with resistant populations opened doors that had been closed to traditional advocacy approaches. More importantly, his willingness to share his own story of transformation became a powerful tool for reaching young people who were following similar paths toward violence. The breakthrough came during a Foundation conference in Geneva, where Connor was presenting preliminary results from the veteran program to an audience of international peacekeeping officials. His presentation included a detailed case study of His own journey from teenage perpetrator to military service to restorative justice advocate. I spent my adolescence believing that strength meant the ability to humiliate others, Connor told the assembled delegates. Military service taught me that real strength means protecting the vulnerable and building sustainable peace. But it was working with the Rodriguez Foundation that showed me how those principles could be applied to prevent the very violence I had once participated in. The audience was captivated by Connor's unflinching honesty about his past mistakes and his systematic approach to making amends. When he finished speaking, several delegates approached him immediately with requests to bring his program to their countries. Emma watched from the back of the conference room with pride that surprised her in its intensity. The weak teenager who had once enabled Tyler's cruelty had become someone capable of inspiring international cooperation and meaningful change. His transformation validated the Foundation's core belief that people could fundamentally change when given proper support and accountability. After the conference, Emma and Connor found themselves walking along Lake Geneva, discussing expansion plans and implementation strategies. The conversation felt remarkably natural, free from the tension that had characterized their earlier interactions. "Emma," Connor said as they paused near a fountain overlooking the lake, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." Emma braced herself for another apology, but Connor's next words surprised her. "What you did at Corner Cafe that day, calling your mother and refusing to accept Tyler's behavior any longer, that wasn't just standing up for yourself. You probably saved my life." Emma looked at him in confusion. "How do you mean?" Connor sat on a bench facing the water, his expression reflecting deep contemplation. "I was following Tyler down a path that would have destroyed everything good about my future. If you hadn't forced consequences for our actions, I would have continued enabling that behavior through college and beyond." He turned to meet Emma's eyes directly. "Military service gave me discipline and purpose, but it was watching your response to our cruelty that taught me what real leadership looked like. You could have destroyed us completely, but instead you chose to use your power to create something positive." Emma sat beside him on the bench, processing this unexpected perspective on events she had experienced primarily as personal trauma. "I was just trying to survive high school. You were modeling transformative justice before any of us knew what that concept meant. Your response to our harassment became the template for everything the Foundation has accomplished since then." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sun set over Lake Geneva while processing how dramatically their relationship had evolved. Emma realized that Connor's presence in her life now represented something she had never expected, proof that her foundational beliefs about human potential for change were not naive idealism but achievable reality. "Connor," Emma said finally, "I want you to lead the international expansion of the veteran program. Full autonomy, adequate resources, and the authority to adapt our methods for different cultural contexts." Connor's surprise was evident in his immediate straightening posture. "Emma, that's an extraordinary responsibility. Are you certain I'm ready for that level of leadership?" Emma smiled with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her instincts about people's potential for growth. "I'm certain that the person you've become is exactly who this work needs. You understand both the psychology of perpetrators and the discipline required for sustainable change. Most importantly, you understand that transformation requires complete honesty about who we used to be." Connor stood and extended his hand in a gesture that was both professional and deeply personal. "I won't disappoint the trust you're placing in me." Emma shook his hand firmly, feeling the symbolic completion of a journey that had begun with teenage cruelty and evolved into global cooperation. "I know you won't, because you've already proven that people can become completely different than who they started as." As they walked back toward the conference center, Emma reflected on how much her understanding of justice had evolved since that terrifying day when Tyler had exposed her identity to the entire school. She had begun this journey seeking protection and revenge, but had discovered something far more powerful: the ability to transform enemies into allies, pain into purpose, and individual trauma into collective healing. The Rodriguez Foundation's work would continue expanding across continents, reaching communities that traditional approaches had failed to help. But the real victory was not in the programs they built or the statistics they generated. The real victory was in moments like this one, when former enemies could walk together as partners in creating a more just and compassionate world. Connor's transformation from enabler of cruelty to leader of healing proved that Emma's fundamental belief was correct. Given proper accountability, support, and opportunity for meaningful contribution, people could change in ways that seemed impossible. That insight would guide the Foundation's work for generations to come, creating ripple effects that would touch millions of lives in ways they could never fully measure. 10 years had passed since Emma Rodriguez first walked through the doors of Lincoln Valley High School as a frightened teenager hiding her identity. And today she stood at those same doors as a woman whose name had become synonymous with revolutionary change in how the world approached conflict resolution. The building looked smaller than she remembered, its hallways narrower, its lockers more worn, but the energy remained the same. Teenagers navigating the complex social dynamics that would shape their understanding of power, justice, and human nature for the rest of their lives. Emma was here for the dedication ceremony of the Lincoln Valley Peace Studies program, the first high school curriculum in the United States to integrate restorative justice principles into standard education. The program represented the culmination of everything she had learned about preventing violence, rather than simply responding to it after damage had been done. More importantly, it represented the final transformation of the place where her own journey had begun in pain and isolation. Principal Morrison, now in her final year before retirement, greeted Emma at the entrance with a mixture of pride and lingering amazement at how dramatically one student's experience had reshaped their entire educational approach. "Emma, I have to confess that when all this started, I thought we were dealing with typical teenage drama. I never imagined it would lead to fundamental changes in how we think about education itself." Emma smiled as they walked through hallways that had once felt like a minefield of potential humiliation. Sometimes the most important changes begin with the most ordinary conflicts. The difference is whether we choose to learn from them or simply endure them. The ceremony was being held in the newly renovated auditorium, its walls decorated with quotes from peace advocates, conflict resolution theorists, and former students whose lives had been transformed by participating in restorative justice programs. Emma recognized many of the faces in the gathering crowd: teachers who had embraced new approaches to classroom management, parents who had learned to mediate family conflicts through dialogue rather than punishment, and students who were experiencing school as a place of growth rather than survival. But the face that captured her attention was one she hadn't seen in several years. Tyler Mitchell stood near the back of the auditorium, wearing the simple uniform of a social worker and holding the hand of a young woman Emma didn't recognize. His transformation had been so complete that Emma wondered if casual observers could possibly connect this quiet, thoughtful man with the arrogant teenager who had once terrorized fellow students for entertainment. Tyler noticed her attention and approached with the careful respect of someone who understood that their relationship would always carry the weight of their shared history. "Emma, thank you for making this possible. The Peace Studies program is going to change lives in ways we probably can't even imagine yet." Emma studied Tyler's face, noting the lines around his eyes that suggested years of serious work and genuine responsibility. "How are you finding social work?" "Challenging and meaningful in ways I never expected. I'm working primarily with teenagers who are exhibiting early signs of aggressive behavior, helping them understand the psychological patterns that lead to violence before those patterns become entrenched." Tyler's voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had found his true calling. "Every day I see kids who are following the same path I took, and every day I get the opportunity to help them choose a different direction. Emma felt a familiar sense of satisfaction at witnessing genuine transformation. But Tyler's next words surprised her with their insight. "Emma, I wanted you to know that your decision to offer me a chance to work with the foundation probably prevented me from becoming a complete cautionary tale. But more than that, it taught me something about leadership that I use every day in my work now." "What's that?" Tyler glanced around the auditorium, taking in the diverse crowd of people who had gathered to celebrate the institutionalization of restorative justice principles in education. Real leaders don't just solve problems. They create systems that prevent problems from occurring in the first place. You didn't just address the harassment I was perpetrating. You built something that would protect future students from experiencing what you went through." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "What are you working on now?" "I'm developing a program for parents who are inadvertently raising children to be bullies. Most of them don't realize they're teaching prejudice, entitlement, and aggression until their kids start exhibiting those behaviors at school." Tyler's enthusiasm for his work was evident in his animated explanation. "We're finding that early intervention with families can prevent cycles of harmful behavior from continuing across generations." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had traveled from Chicago specifically for this ceremony. Emma's mother had aged gracefully, her hair now silver but her bearing still commanding the kind of respect that came from decades of successful leadership in one of America's most challenging industries. "Tyler," Dr. Rodriguez said warmly, extending her hand in greeting. "I've been following your work with family intervention programs. The preliminary results are remarkable." Tyler shook her hand with obvious nervousness, still processing the surreal nature of receiving praise from a woman whose daughter he had once tormented. "Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Your foundation's support has been essential to developing effective methodologies." Dr. Rodriguez turned to Emma with a smile that mixed maternal pride with professional admiration. "I think it's time for your speech, dear. The ceremony is about to begin." Emma walked to the podium with the confident stride of someone who had delivered addresses to world leaders, but as she looked out at the assembled crowd, she felt the weight of this particular moment more acutely than any international conference or diplomatic gathering. This was where it had all started, where a frightened teenager had learned that hiding from your power was just another form of selfishness. 10 years ago, I stood in these hallways as a student who was desperately trying to be invisible, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly across the auditorium. "I thought that concealing my family's wealth would allow me to experience authentic relationships and genuine acceptance. What I learned instead was that authenticity isn't about hiding who you are. It's about using who you are to create positive change in the world." She paused, making eye contact with Tyler, then with Principal Morrison, then with students whose faces reflected the same uncertainty and hope she had once felt. "The harassment I experienced here was painful and traumatic, but it taught me something crucial about the nature of conflict. Most violence, whether physical or psychological, stems from people's inability to process their own pain and insecurity in healthy ways." Emma clicked to her first slide, showing statistics about the Peace Studies program's impact during its pilot phase. Students who participate in restorative justice education show measurably higher levels of empathy, improved conflict resolution skills, and significantly lower rates of disciplinary problems. But more importantly, they develop the emotional intelligence necessary to recognize and interrupt cycles of harm before they cause lasting damage. The presentation continued with testimonials from students, teachers, and parents who had experienced the program's benefits firsthand. A former bully who had learned to channel his aggression into advocacy for younger students. A victim of cyberbullying who had developed the confidence to speak publicly about her experiences. A teacher who had transformed her classroom management approach from punishment-based to relationship-centered. "What we've discovered," Emma continued, is that schools have the potential to be laboratories for social healing rather than battlegrounds for social dominance. When we teach young people that their differences are sources of strength rather than targets for ridicule, we create the foundation for a more just and compassionate society. Emma's final slide showed a world map highlighting the locations where Lincoln Valley's Peace Studies curriculum was being adapted and implemented. This program, born from the specific conflicts that occurred in these hallways, is now reaching students in 43 countries across 6 continents. Local pain, when processed with wisdom and courage, can become universal healing. As Emma concluded her remarks, the auditorium erupted in sustained applause, but her attention was drawn to a familiar figure entering through the side door. Blake Stevens, now wearing the uniform of a paramedic, had slipped in during the final minutes of her presentation. His presence completed the reunion of all 4 teenagers, whose confrontation at Corner Cafe had catalyzed everything that followed. After the ceremony, the 4 former adversaries found themselves gathered in the same corner of the cafeteria where Emma had once eaten lunch in isolation. The irony was not lost on any of them that they were now collaborating on initiatives designed to prevent other teenagers from experiencing the conflicts that had once defined their relationships. Blake spoke first, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing medical emergencies. Emma, I've been implementing conflict de-escalation techniques based on foundation training in my work with emergency services. The number of situations where we can resolve disputes without police intervention has increased dramatically. Jessica, who had completed her master's degree in social work and was now directing anti-bullying programs for the Ohio Department of Education, nodded enthusiastically. We're seeing similar results in school districts across the state. When teachers are trained in restorative approaches, suspension rates drop by an average of 60%. Connor's voice joined the conversation from behind them as he approached their table. The international expansion has been extraordinary. We now have veteran transition programs operating in 12 countries, and the success rates exceed anything traditional military rehabilitation has achieved. Emma looked around at these 4 people who had once been locked in patterns of cruelty and victimization, now working together to create systems that would protect vulnerable populations around the world. Do any of you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't found a way to transform our conflict into collaboration? Tyler considered the question seriously. I think about it often. Without the accountability and support I received through your foundation, I probably would have continued the patterns I learned from my father. I might have become exactly the kind of person who perpetuates cycles of harm across generations. Jessica's expression grew thoughtful. I was heading toward a life of superficial relationships and meaningless achievements. Learning to examine my own capacity for cruelty forced me to develop genuine empathy and authentic purpose. Blake nodded slowly. Emergency services work taught me that most crises are preventable if you address underlying problems before they explode into violence. That's basically what we're doing with conflict resolution education. Connor's contribution carried the weight of his international experience. Military service showed me that force can create temporary stability, but only justice can create lasting peace. What we've built together achieves something that armies and diplomats have been attempting for centuries. Emma felt a profound sense of completion as she listened to their reflections. The journey from teenage harassment to global cooperation had vindicated her fundamental belief that people could change in ways that seemed impossible, given proper accountability, support, and opportunity for meaningful contribution. I think, Emma said finally, that our story proves something important about the nature of redemption and transformation. Real change doesn't happen because people feel guilty about their past actions. It happens when they discover that becoming better versions of themselves allows them to contribute to something larger than their individual concerns. As they prepared to leave the school where their transformative journey had begun, Emma reflected on how much her understanding of power and justice had evolved. She had begun this experience believing that strength meant the ability to hide vulnerability and endure suffering in silence. She now understood that true strength meant the courage to be completely honest about your capabilities and to use those capabilities in service of collective healing. The Lincoln Valley Peace Studies program would continue reaching students for generations to come, teaching them that conflict could be transformed into collaboration, that pain could become purpose, and that individual courage could create systemic change. But the real legacy of Emma's journey was not in the programs they had built or the statistics they had generated. The real legacy was in the proof that enemies could become allies, that trauma could become wisdom, and that the most authentic expression of power was the commitment to ensuring that others never experienced the harm you had endured. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.